The massive chamber of the Galactic Council buzzed with tension. Hundreds of alien representatives filled the circular room, their forms as varied as the stars themselves. Some towered 3 meters tall with armored scales, while others floated in anti-gravity fields, their crystalline bodies gleaming under the chamber's bright lights. Tom Reed, the human representative, sat quietly in his simple black uniform. He looked small compared to the other aliens, especially next to the massive warrior races that dominated the council. At his side, Admiral Stone kept her face carefully neutral, though her eyes missed nothing. "The crystal swarm has already consumed 3 outer systems," growled Representative Kroll, his massive fists leaving dents in the titanium podium. His species, the Battleborn, had ruled half the galaxy before joining the council. "We must strike now, with everything we have." Sounds of agreement echoed through the chamber. The warrior races were already calling up their fleets, boasting of weapons that could crack planets and ships that could withstand supernovas. Tom watched them, remembering Earth's history of rushing into battles. He thought of all the wars where retreat had saved armies, where indirect approaches had won victories. When the shouting died down, he stood up. "The Council recognizes Human Representative Tom Reed," announced the automated system. "Thank you," Tom said, his voice calm and measured. "I suggest we consider evacuation of the threatened systems first." The crystal swarm's movement patterns. Laughter interrupted him. Not gentle laughter, but the kind that cut deep. The Battleborn representative's wounds glowed bright orange with amusement, a sign of deep mockery in his species. Typical human response. Kroll boomed, always looking for a way to run. "Tell us, human, does your species ever think of anything except escape?" Tom felt the old familiar shame trying to surface. Humanity was the newest member of the council, and many still saw them as cowards. The warrior races couldn't understand why humans always chose to study problems first, to look for indirect solutions, to plan careful retreats. "The crystal swarm devours energy," Tom continued, keeping his voice steady. "Direct combat might." "Might what?" interrupted Representative Mox of the Steel Hunters, her metallic tentacles clicking with irritation. "Are you suggesting the combined might of our civilizations cannot crush these simple crystal creatures? We who have fought wars for millions of years." Admiral Stone touched Tom's arm gently. On her tablet, she showed him the latest sensor readings from the outer systems. The crystal swarm was moving faster than expected, adapting to each attack. But the council members were too busy trading war stories to notice. "At least allow us to evacuate the civilian populations," Tom tried one last time. "Give us time to study the enemy's patterns." Study. Patterns. Kroll's wound lights flashed dangerous red now. "The human thinks we should treat this like one of their primitive research projects." Well, let me be clear. The Battleborn do not retreat. We do not evacuate. We do not study. We fight. The chamber erupted in cheers. One by one, the warrior races pledged their fleets to an immediate massive assault. Their ships would gather at the Vorex sector, then launch a direct attack on the crystal swarm. Tom sat down heavily, watching the war fever spread through the chamber. Besides him, Admiral Stone was already sending encrypted messages back to Earth Command. They both knew what was coming. "Let them record that humans were too cowardly to join the great battle," Kroll announced to more cheers. "We will show them how real warriors fight." Tom and Admiral Stone exchanged glances. They had seen this before, in humanity's own bloody history. The warrior races were about to learn a hard lesson. That sometimes, the most courageous act was being willing to look like a coward. As the council chamber descended into war preparations, human ships were quietly moving into position around vulnerable systems. They wouldn't join the massive assault fleet. Instead, they would watch, learn, and prepare. Because humanity had learned long ago that there was no shame in strategic withdrawal, no weakness in studying an enemy. And sometimes, Those dismissed as cowards were the only ones left standing to save everyone else. The combined fleet of the warrior races was a sight that would have made ancient human armies tremble. 10,000 ships filled the Vorek sector, their weapons glowing with enough power to shatter planets. The Battleborn's dreadnoughts, each 20 kilometers long, led the formation. Behind them, the Steel Hunters' living metal ships shifted and flowed like liquid mercury. 3 human observation vessels hung back at the edge of the sector, maintaining what the warrior races called a cowardly distance. Inside the lead ship, the Galileo, Tom Reed, and Admiral Stone watched their sensors with growing concern. "They're not even trying to scan the crystal swarm's energy patterns," Admiral Stone muttered, her eyes fixed on the tactical display. The massive fleet was arranging itself into an attack formation, preparing to unleash its full firepower at once. Tom nodded grimly. "They think overwhelming force is the answer to everything." He touched a control, magnifying the image of the approaching crystal swarm. The entities looked beautiful in a terrifying way. Massive crystalline structures that absorbed light and energy, growing larger with each star system they consumed. "All ships, prepare to fire." Kroll's voice boomed through the command channel. The Battleborn commander had taken charge of the fleet, as his species was considered the most warrior-like of all. "Show these mindless crystals the power of true warriors." Admiral Stone's sensors picked up the energy buildup as thousands of ships charged their main weapons. The human crew watched in tense silence. They had seen the preliminary data, had studied the patterns. They knew what was about to happen. The combined fleet fired. A wave of energy that could have cracked a planet struck the crystal swarm. For a moment, the void of space lit up brighter than a sun. The warrior races roared in triumph across all channels. But when the light faded, the crystal swarm was larger than before. "By the stars," someone whispered on the command channel. The crystal entities had absorbed the energy from the attack, using it to grow and multiply. What had been a swarm of 1,000 crystal entities was now a swarm of tens of thousands. "Impossible," Kroll roared. "Fire again. Full power." "Wait," Tom tried to warn them. "The crystals are absorbing." But the warrior fleet fired again and again. Each blast made the swarm stronger, larger, hungrier. The crystal entities began to move faster, drawn to the massive energy signatures of the warrior ships. "Fall back," the Steel Hunters' commander finally ordered. But it was too late. The swarm surrounded the fleet, their crystalline forms pulsing with stolen energy. Ships began to disappear from the tactical display as the crystals drained them dry. From the Galileo's safe distance, the human crew watched in horror. The proud warrior fleet was being devoured. A Battleborn dreadnought, big enough to house 1,000,000 crew, vanished in seconds as crystal entities absorbed every joule of energy from its systems. "We have to help them," Tom said, but his voice was heavy with the knowledge that they couldn't. "Not directly. Not yet." Admiral Stone nodded. "Help them by doing what we do best." She turned to her crew. "Record everything. Every energy pattern, every crystal formation, every reaction. We need to understand these things if we're going to beat them." The remains of the warrior fleet scattered in panic, their mighty weapons useless against an enemy that turned their strength against them. The crystal swarm, now vastly larger and stronger, began moving toward the populated systems they had meant to protect. On the Galileo's command channel, a weak transmission came through. It was Kroll, his voice missing its usual warrior pride. "Humans, you were right to stay back. Our fleet is destroyed. The outer systems are defenseless." Tom looked at Admiral Stone. They both knew that humans weren't staying back out of fear, but out of strategy. The observation ships had gathered crucial data about the swarm's energy absorption patterns, data that might save what was left of the galaxy. "We'll help," Tom transmitted back, "but we'll do it our way." Because sometimes survival required more than courage. It required the wisdom to know when not to fight, and the patience to find a better way. The emergency council meeting was nothing like the proud gathering from before. Many seats sat empty, their representatives lost in the failed attack. The Battleborn's Kroll, once mighty and proud, now sat with his wound lights dimmed to a dull gray of morning. The Steel Hunters had lost half their fleet, their remaining ships still carrying the scars of crystal attacks. Tom Reed stood at the center of the chamber, but this time no one laughed. Behind him, a hologram showed the data collected by the human observation ships. Admiral Stone controlled the display, highlighting key patterns in the crystal swarm's behavior. The entities don't just absorb energy, Tom explained, his voice gentle but firm. They respond to it. Watch here. The hologram showed a crystal entity changing direction when hit by specific energy frequencies. They're drawn to some frequencies and repelled by others. What good is this knowledge? Asked a Steel Hunter representative, her metallic tentacles drooping with exhaustion. We cannot fight them. Every weapon makes them stronger. Who said anything about fighting? Admiral Stone stepped forward, zooming the hologram out to show a sector map. We've been studying Earth's old military records. Sometimes, the best way to win isn't to fight at all. The council chamber grew quiet. Even the most aggressive species were listening now. Their mighty weapons had failed. Their warrior pride had led to disaster. They were ready to hear something new. We propose a trap, Tom said, bringing up a new display. But first, we need to evacuate 3 sectors. Evacuate. Kroll's wound lights flickered with confusion. You still talk of running away? No. Admiral Stone's voice was steel wrapped in silk. We talk of turning their hunger against them. But we need space to work. Empty space. The hologram showed a complex pattern of electromagnetic generators, positioned across 3 sectors. Tom explained how they would create specific frequency patterns, drawing the crystal swarm along a carefully planned path. At key points, massive pulse arrays would hit the swarm with frequencies that the human ships had observed weakening the crystal structures. You want us to give up 3 sectors? A Battleborn general's wound lights flashed angry red. To surrender? We want to save everyone else, Tom replied. He brought up population statistics. 3 sectors evacuated now, or 20 sectors lost later. Those are our options. Admiral Stone stepped forward. Human history is full of battles won by indirect means, by making the enemy's strength their weakness. The crystals hunt energy. Fine. We'll give them energy, but on our terms. The council chamber erupted in debate. The warrior races struggled with the idea. Retreat went against everything they believed in. Setting traps felt like cowardice to species that prided themselves on face-to-face combat. But then Kroll stood up. His massive form cast a shadow across the chamber floor. I lost half my fleet, he said, his voice heavy. My finest warriors, gone in minutes. Because we wouldn't listen. He turned to face the council. Because we thought humans were cowards for wanting to study the enemy first. The chamber grew silent again. Kroll's wound lights shifted to a color no human had seen before. A deep purple that spoke of painful wisdom. I say we try their way. We lost our battle. Let them win their trap. One by one, the council members began to agree. The evacuation orders went out immediately. Human ships, designed for rescue and transport rather than combat, began moving civilians from the 3 sectors. All the while, engineering teams started placing the electromagnetic generators in precise patterns. Tom watched the operations from the council chamber's tactical display. He remembered all the times humans had been mocked for building rescue ships instead of battleships, for studying enemies instead of rushing to fight them, for appearing weak when they were actually preparing. Will this work? Kroll asked quietly, standing beside him. Tom nodded. It has to. Sometimes the greatest victory comes from being willing to look like you're losing. The crystal swarm was approaching. But this time, they would find something different waiting for them. Not warrior pride or brute force, but human ingenuity. And perhaps that would make all the difference. The evacuation of 3 sectors happened faster than anyone expected. Human transport ships worked alongside alien vessels, moving billions of beings to safety. Where the warrior races had built warships, humans had always focused on rescue craft and civilian transports. Now, that cowardly preparation was saving lives. On the bridge of the Galileo, Tom Reed watched the tactical display as the last civilian ships jumped to safety. Behind him, Admiral Stone coordinated with engineering teams placing the electromagnetic generators. Each generator had to be positioned perfectly for their trap to work. "The swarm changes direction," reported a sensor officer. "They're following the energy trails exactly as predicted." Tom nodded. The human plan was working so far. They had studied how crystal entities followed energy like sharks followed blood in water. Now they were using that hunger, laying a trail of electromagnetic breadcrumbs that would lead the swarm exactly where they wanted it to go. Kroll's massive battleship hung nearby, its weapons powered down at human request. The battle-born commander had swallowed his pride enough to follow human leadership, but Tom could hear the strain in his voice. "These generators look like cities," Kroll said. "You're building fake cities to draw them in." "Yes," Admiral Stone answered. "Cities that will give them exactly what they want, until they don't." The first wave of crystal entities reached an evacuated system. The human trap was ready. Everyone watched as the crystals approached the seemingly abandoned cities, massive structures humming with exactly the type of energy the swarm found irresistible. "They're feeding," the sensor officer reported. "Energy absorption rates are—" "Wait, something's changing." The crystal entities had surrounded the false city, trying to drain its power. But these weren't normal power generators. They were specialized devices, built to emit frequencies that the human ships had observed causing stress in crystal structures. As the entities fed, hairline cracks began appearing in their formations. "By the stars," Kroll whispered, "it's working." "One city won't stop them," Tom cautioned. "But each feeding makes them a little weaker. Each generator plants the seeds of their destruction." He turned to Admiral Stone. "Time for Phase 2. She nodded, sending the signal. Across the sector, more generators activated, laying new energy trails. The crystal swarm, still hungry despite their damaged structures, followed the trails exactly as planned. They were being led, step by step, into a massive trap. A steel hunter ship commander opened a channel. "The humans are hurting them," she said, her metallic voice holding new respect. "Like shepherds leading prey into a cage." "Not prey," Tom corrected gently. "We're not hunters. We're problem solvers. Sometimes the best solution isn't fighting. It's understanding what drives your enemy and using that understanding." More crystal entities were showing damage now. The specialized frequencies were having their effect, creating weaknesses in the seemingly invincible swarm. But it was slow work, careful work. The kind of patience that warrior races had always mocked humans for having. "I see now," Kroll said quietly. His wound lights had shifted to that deep purple of painful wisdom again. "When humans run away, they're not running from the fight. They're running toward a solution." Admiral Stone smiled. "We learned long ago that sometimes you have to give up ground to win the war. Each step back can be a step toward victory, if you plan it right." The tactical display showed more crystal entities following the energy trails, moving deeper into the human trap. Their numbers were still massive, but now they were dancing to a human tune, following paths laid by those they would have once dismissed as cowards. "The second generator network is ready," reported an engineer. "Ready to activate on your command." Tom looked at Admiral Stone, who nodded. They had planned this for days, calculating every move. Now it was time to tighten the noose. "Activate," Tom ordered. "Let's show them what human cowardice can really do." Because sometimes, the greatest strength lies not in standing your ground, but in knowing exactly when and how to give it up. The crystal swarm was about to learn that lesson the hard way. The second wave of generators activated across the evacuated sectors, filling space with a complex web of electromagnetic frequencies. On the Galileo's tactical display, The crystal swarm's movements looked like a dance now, each step guided by human planning, each turn led by carefully placed energy signatures. Main swarm has entered the nexus point, reported the sensor officer. All entities are within the containment zone. Admiral Stone nodded to Tom. This was the moment they had planned for, the reason they had spent so much time studying instead of fighting. Initiate the pulse sequence, she ordered. Across 3 sectors, hundreds of generators changed their outputs simultaneously. The frequencies that had been weakening the crystal entities suddenly shifted, becoming a coordinated attack on their structure. The human ships had observed how certain energy patterns could disrupt the swarm's hive-mind connection. Now they were using that knowledge. Look. Kroll's voice held awe as the tactical display showed the crystal swarm breaking apart. Where there had been one massive, coordinated force, now there were thousands of confused, individual entities. You've broken their connection to each other. Divide and conquer, Tom explained. An old human military principle. But we divided them with knowledge, not brute force. The separated crystal entities began moving erratically. Without their hive-mind coordination, they couldn't maintain their complex feeding patterns. Some crashed into each other, their weakened structures shattering on impact. Others tried to flee, only to encounter more generators emitting disruptive frequencies. A steel hunter commander opened a channel. The smaller groups are much weaker, she reported, her metallic tentacles waving with excitement. Our weapons, they're actually working now. She was right. The warrior race's ships, which had been useless against the unified swarm, were now effectively destroying the confused, isolated crystal entities. Their energy weapons, once absorbed and used for growth, were now shattering the weakened crystals. This was your plan all along, Kroll said, his wound lights glowing with understanding. You knew our weapons would work, but only after you weakened them, separated them. Admiral Stone smiled. Humans learned long ago that you don't have to be the strongest to win. You just have to be the smartest about how you use your strength. The battle, if it could even be called that now, continued across the sectors. The crystal entities, once so terrifying in their unity, were being systematically eliminated. Some tried to reform their hive-mind connection, but the human generators kept disrupting their attempts. Each time they tried to coordinate, another pulse would scatter them again. Third wave of generators coming online, announced the engineering team. The final phase of the human plan was starting. These generators would herd the remaining crystal entities into smaller and smaller spaces, making them easier for the warrior ships to eliminate. Tom watched the tactical display, remembering how the Council had laughed at human caution, how they had mocked human ships for having more sensor arrays than weapons. Now those sensors had given them the knowledge they needed to win. Those cowardly observation posts had revealed the enemy's weakness. I must admit something, Kroll said, his massive form casting a shadow across the bridge. When humans first joined the Council, we thought you were weak. We saw your careful planning as fear, your study as hesitation. He paused, his wound lights shifting to a new color, one that indicated deep respect in his species. We were wrong. This isn't cowardice. This is power of a different kind. Admiral Stone nodded. Every human child learns the story of David and Goliath, how a small, clever fighter defeated a mighty warrior by understanding his weakness. We've been practicing that lesson for thousands of years. The tactical display showed more crystal entities falling to the combined fleet. The mighty warrior races were finally winning their battle, but only because the cowardly humans had shown them how. It was a lesson the galaxy wouldn't soon forget. The battle entered its final phase. Across 3 sectors, the remnants of the once mighty crystal swarm fled from one trap into another. The human generators had turned space itself into a maze, with only one path forward, straight into carefully planned killing zones. Status report, Tom called from the Galileo's bridge. The tactical display showed scattered groups of crystal entities, their once beautiful formations now broken and chaotic. Swarm cohesion at 12%, reported the sensor officer. 90% of surviving entities show major structural damage. They can't absorb energy efficiently anymore. Admiral Stone nodded with satisfaction. The human plan had worked better than anyone expected. By weakening the crystal structures slowly, by breaking their hive mind piece by piece, they had turned invincible enemies into manageable threats. A battle-born strike group reported another victory. Target cluster eliminated, Kroll announced, his wound lights glowing with a warrior's satisfaction. These fractured crystals shatter easily now. Your trap worked, humans. Your cowardice was wisdom all along. More reports flooded in. The Steel Hunters' ships were cutting through scattered crystal groups with ease. Other warrior races had joined the hunt, their weapons now effective against the weakened enemy. What had started as a desperate retreat had turned into a coordinated victory. "Look at them fight now," Tom said quietly to Admiral Stone. "All that warrior pride, all that courage, it's finally being used effectively. Because they learned to wait for the right moment." "Speaking of the right moment," Stone replied, checking her tactical display. "It's time for the final phase." She opened a channel to all ships. "All vessels, clear Zone Alpha. Prepare for containment pulse." The combined fleet pulled back, leaving a cluster of crystal entities trapped between generator fields. These were the strongest survivors, the ones that had resisted the disruption frequencies the longest. But even they showed signs of damage, their once perfect structures riddled with cracks. Containment pulse in 3, 2, 1. Every generator in the sector fired simultaneously. The space lit up with a complex pattern of electromagnetic waves, frequencies tested and refined through careful human observation. The trapped crystal entities tried to absorb the energy, but their damaged structures couldn't handle it. "Look," Kroll whispered over the command channel. Everyone watched as the last major crystal cluster began to break apart. Not just separate, but actually disintegrate. Their structures had been weakened so carefully, so precisely, that this final pulse was more than they could handle. The tactical display updated, showing fewer and fewer enemy signatures. The remaining crystal entities were being systematically eliminated by the warrior ships, their weakened state making them easy targets for even the smallest weapons. "Victory," announced the Steel Hunter commander, her metallic voice carrying unusual emotion. "The swarm is destroyed. The sectors are safe." She paused before adding, "Thanks to human cowardice." Tom smiled at the way she said cowardice, not as an insult anymore, but almost as a term of respect. The warrior races had learned that courage came in many forms. Sometimes it looked like charging into battle. Sometimes it looked like stepping back to study your enemy. Admiral Stone addressed the fleet. "All ships begin recovery operations. I want every crystal fragment collected and analyzed. We need to understand them completely in case they ever return." "Still studying, even in victory," Kroll noted, but his tone was warm. "I begin to think humans never stop learning." "That's our real strength," Tom replied. "Not our weapons or our tactics, but our endless curiosity, our need to understand." The fleet began its cleanup work, warrior ships working alongside human vessels. Where once there had been mockery and distrust, now there was respect. The galaxy had learned an important lesson, that sometimes the most powerful weapon wasn't a gun or a warship, but the patience to wait, watch, and understand. Victory hadn't come from fearless charges or mighty weapons. It had come from careful study, strategic retreat, and the courage to look like a coward while executing a winning plan. 1 month after the Crystal Swarm's defeat, the Galactic Council chamber felt different. The warrior races still sat in their designated seats, their weapons still hung at their sides, but something fundamental had changed. Where once there had been mockery of human methods, now there was curiosity. Tom Reed stood at the center of the chamber, just as he had when this crisis began. But this time, he wasn't being laughed at. The council had gathered to learn from the race they once dismissed as cowards. "The final analysis is complete," Tom announced, bringing up a holographic display. "We've studied every fragment of the crystal entities. We now understand not just how we defeated them, but why they appeared in the first place. Admiral Stone stepped forward, expanding the display to show energy patterns across the galaxy. The crystal swarm was drawn to high-energy weapons testing. The very weapons the warrior races were so proud of actually attracted this threat. The chamber was quiet as this sank in. Kroll, now wearing the formal marks of a battle-born instructor, spoke first. So our strength created our weakness, and human weakness turned out to be strength. Not weakness. Tom corrected gently. Different kinds of strength. Human ships carried more sensors than weapons because we believe understanding is power. We built rescue ships instead of battleships because we value preservation over destruction. The Steel Hunter representative raised her metallic tentacles. My species has already begun incorporating human tactical doctrine into our training. The concept of strategic withdrawal, we never considered it before. We thought any retreat was shameful. There is no shame in stepping back to find a better way forward, Admiral Stone said. Earth's history is full of battles won by those willing to be called cowards while they prepared for victory. The council chamber's mood was thoughtful. Many representatives were reviewing data from the battle, studying how human planning had turned certain defeat into victory. Some were already designing new ships with more sensors, more study capabilities. But what I really want to know, Kroll said, his wound lights glowing with genuine curiosity, is how humans became this way. How did you learn to value knowledge over combat? Tom smiled. We learned it the hard way. Through countless wars where the strongest didn't always win. Through battles where understanding the enemy proved more valuable than any weapon. We learned that true courage isn't about never feeling fear. It's about doing what's necessary despite that fear. The Chamber's automated systems registered dozens of requests for human military history. The warrior races, once so proud of their combat traditions, were eager to learn about Earth's past battles, about times when retreat had led to victory, when study had defeated strength. We're implementing new training programs, a battle-born general announced, teaching our warriors to think before they fight, to study before they strike. His wound lights shifted to that deep purple of wisdom. We're even teaching them to run away. Tactically, of course. Laughter filled the chamber, not mocking this time, but genuine amusement. The warrior races were learning to laugh at themselves, to question their old assumptions. They were growing. The galaxy is changing, Admiral Stone observed quietly to Tom. All because we weren't afraid to be called cowards. No, Tom corrected. Because we were brave enough to be called cowards. There's a difference. The council session continued, with more races requesting human advisors, human tactical training, human perspective. The very qualities they had once mocked, caution, study, strategic withdrawal, were now seen as valuable tools in the galactic defense. As Tom watched the proceedings, he remembered all the times humans had been laughed at in this chamber, all the jokes about their careful nature, their tendency to study problems instead of fighting them. Now those same qualities were being celebrated as wisdom. Sometimes, he realized, the greatest victory wasn't in proving your enemies wrong. It was in teaching them a better way to be right. The galaxy had learned that courage wore many faces, and some of the bravest acts looked nothing like traditional heroism. The age of thoughtless warfare was ending. A new era was beginning, one where wisdom and understanding would stand equal with courage and strength. And it had all started because one species had been brave enough to be called cowards.